curtain. Here, YouTube, YouTube.
Temporary social imagery.
And we're live. Hello, welcome to some Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
And we're back after a short sabbatical. And today we're going to talk about both Barbie and Oppenheimer. But before we do that, Buddy, why don't you tell the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast?
On this podcast, we just fucking talk about movies. This is a fucking movies podcast now, I guess.
No.
But even though I'm glad we did this because Barbenheimer has turned out to be, I think it is a true sea change, right, in the land of sort of movie making. Yeah, I just feel like we've talked so much more.
We'll
about
talk about The Remnant 2
recently.
next week. We're both gonna play it. Right?
Yeah, true. Okay, true. Anyway, but yeah, we're talking about fucking Barbenheimer.
Yes.
The double feature that got memed into existence by Twitter because both Oppenheimer, Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer biopic, and Greta Gerwig's Barbie released on the exact same day. People started memeing about the double feature in the way that you would maybe like see people talk about doing like a Star Wars marathon or like an MCU marathon or whatever. There were all these jokes about it, and those jokes actualized for some reason. And now we're looking at the biggest weekend box office in years in history.
Yeah, so a couple of things just on like kind of like the meta theater, theater economics of it. One, I want to give a lot of credit to the Barbie team, right? Just because like they fucking put work in, right? Barbie was everywhere. There was a rumor that the world had like a shortage on pink paint because of the Barbie movie or something, which appears to be like mostly a fabrication by the Barbie marketing team, or something that's like slightly true that the Barbie marketing team spun out into existence. This is also kind of like the first two really big blockbusters that are like unambiguously post-pandemic, that aren't like a superhero film, right? The superhero films having kind of been like, kind of like lost a lot of their luster. So I think that's part of it. Plus, it's one half of it's Christopher Nolan, one half of it's like I'm sure we'll have some thoughts about like what the Barbie movie actually was, but at the very least, it was marketed entirely as like fun pop stuff. It wasn't exactly that. That's not a criticism per se, but the marketing was a lot less spicy, maybe is the way to put it, than the movie is.
I would also say so. It's funny because to most people, I think this is a weekend of juxtaposition, yes. Right? Christopher Nolan making an incredibly serious and portentous biopic, right? Greta Gerwig doing fun, light, poppy, whatever with like, meta modern stuff with Barbie, right? Like I think what attracted people to that is the contrast between the two, right?
Like very literally, just a thing I want to point out. Significant portions of Oppenheimer are literally in black and white, and the color palette in Barbie is like off the chain pastels, right?
Yeah.
So like literal contrast.
But the thing that I think my read on this was always different, which is that they are a very natural double feature because they are both auteur movies, right? Greta Gerwig, I don't know if people know that Greta Gerwig is like famous, right? She did Lady Bird, which was a kind of awards bait a couple of years ago. Did Little Women, the same sort of thing. Both of these were kind of successful, kind of like indie darling or whatever. And this is sort of her, like break. Her big break into sort of like mainstream like filmmaking, basically, right, where she has like a real budget and the power of a studio and a big movie star behind her, right? Margot Robbie obviously is a pretty one of the biggest actresses in the world, obviously. And I don't even think Christopher Nolan needs the introduction, right? Like this guy is he is a modern day auteur, like in the 70s, right? He is like a Steven Spielberg, he is a Martin Scorsese. He just happens to be 20 years younger than these guys, right? And it's part of sort of like a modern I don't know, just kind of like auteur driven sell, right? Like in the same way that Quentin Tarantino sells you just because he's directing this picture, I think Christopher Nolan sells people just because he's directing the picture. And I think that that's kind of sort of like true for both of these, right? Is that they're very unambiguously like auteur movies coming out in, honestly, I can't remember the last time. Maybe Dune is what I would say is the last time I can think of an auteur driven blockbuster film, right?
Yeah, I think that's so accurate.
Yeah, and so I'm sort of not surprised that these made such a natural double feature. Though I will say, for the record, I did not watch them as a double feature because I just I just couldn't get good tickets to either of them, so I had to see them super late at night, which is fine. I actually like going to like the 10 p.m., 11 p.m. showing at the movie theater. I just see it super late at night. The thing I wanted to ask you before we get into anything is, did you see Oppenheimer in IMAX or Dolby or just
So I
regular?
saw it in Regal's like premiere format, which is like their biggest. It's not IMAX.
Okay.
Um,
I
but
also did not see it in
yeah,
IMAX, but that was intentional. I saw it in Dolby because Dolby, I think, is better than IMAX.
I think
Do you know what Dolby is?
explain. Go for it.
I've talked about Dolby before. I have a special theater near my house called a Dolby Theater. They have a couple things that are special. One is that the blacks are blacker, which means that contrast is really insane, which makes just the pictures incredible, right? And the other thing is for Dolby, the sound is really powerful and dynamic. It'll move throughout the theater, and the speakers are just like bigger or louder, right? Which ended up being pretty funny with Oppenheimer because boy, is that a is that a loud movie
I was
sometimes.
gonna say like so the thing the Regal one is called RPX.
Mhm.
I can't quickly find exactly what that's supposed to be, but like Tenet, which I saw in actually the same theater, and The Dark Knight, I found this is like a purely technical. I found the sound mixing on Oppenheimer to be less than ideal, which according to Christopher Nolan means that the theater isn't properly calibrated, right? That they mix for good theaters or whatever. Still incredibly aggravating. Um,
Yeah, I loved the sound, and the music and everything. But I have seen a lot of people. I've seen a lot of people complain about the music. Actually, I thought the music was great. But I also think maybe it's like a taste thing because Christopher Nolan and I seem to like this version. I guess I would say of like scoring is it's not subtle.
yeah, so I will say,
So
I thought that the actual sound I thought was very good, but the mixing it has the same mixing problem that Tenet and Bane had, right? And that I can't always understand what the characters are saying because it feels undermixed compared to
oh,
the
sure.
sound
Yeah.
effects.
Okay.
Um,
I never had that issue, but I imagine that it's because I was in this special Dolby
yeah,
theater, right, where the sound is special. So
yeah. I
that
will
would
say
make
it was
sense.
better than Tenet was like nigh unintelligible to me half the time. This this one was better, but there were moments.
You know, I have watched Tenet twice, and I don't think I could tell you anything about that movie. Fell out of my brain immediately afterwards. I like John, I think his name is John David Washington or whatever, Denzel Washington's kid. I think he's a really talented actor, and I like him as a leading man, but I really don't
I
remember
like
anything about that movie at all.
I like what is it? Jacob Cullen, the guy who plays the werewolf in the Twilight movies.
uh
Robert, maybe.
Robert Pattinson? He plays
Yeah, that one.
Edward.
Oh,
Oh, and
whatever.
Batman, obviously. Yeah, okay, okay, sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, Barbie didn't matter as much to me. I just saw that in a regular old theater, but I also don't think that like I said, I don't think that matters. So, um,
Yeah, yeah. No,
I don't
to
know.
your
I have
point
nothing to
about late,
say.
I saw Barbie at 10:30 in the morning and Oppenheimer at like 8 at night. So you know.
Okay.
Um,
I will say, oh wait, hold on. I need to do a thing. I will say one insane thing that I personally was just so called out by is before I went to go see Barbie, I was just like, you know what? I haven't watched the Zack Snyder cut of Justice League in a while. And I was like halfway through before I went to go see Barbie. And sure enough, there's a fucking line in that movie making fun of guys watching the Snyder cut. Uh,
yeah. Um, just as so before we get into the meat of the movies, just real quick, I want to say I don't know what it sounds like by you, but both of these movies had a half hour of fucking trailers before they started it. They started a half hour after the putative show times, which is endlessly infuriating to me. Right? Like
I
it
have
used
to
to be
say, I
15
built that
minutes.
in and
No,
I
it
just
used to be
arrived to the
15
theater 20
minutes.
minutes late.
It used to be 15 minutes, and I would have been okay with 15 minutes. It's like, anyway, sorry. But let's give our pre spoiler reviews. Why don't you go first? Give me your pre spoiler thoughts on Oppenheimer and Barbie.
I like both these movies for a variety of different reasons. I think both of them have kind of like problems, but you know, and the problems are fun. The problems are the auteur version, the auteur kind of problems that are fun to talk about and get into, and they make the they make the film feel like it gives the film like texture and uniqueness, right? So like the issues that Oppenheimer has are issues that only a Christopher Nolan movie would introduce to Oppenheimer, right? If anybody else shot this movie, it would be way different, and we'll talk about what I would expect those differences to kind of be. But I also think that it would be worse for those differences, even though I also think that those differences kind of are bad for the movie overall. And actually, like, probably it's sort of like the difference between like sanding and like rough wood, right? One of these gets sanded down to oblivion by like executive notes or whatever, and it's probably the better movie, but it's also the more conventional movie. The other one doesn't get sanded down, is kind of weird and muddled, and but it makes it pop, and out of sort of the background of all of the movies that you watch in a year, right? It makes it very unique, which feels good. The same sort of thing I think is also true of Barbie. But in Barbie, I think it's just like sort of like a Mr. Burns. Have you ever seen the episode of The Simpsons where Mr. Burns has so many illnesses that none of them can kill him because they're all too
the door.
busy fighting each other with the door? That's what Barbie is. It has so many ideas that it just kind of all of them get stuck in the door. Nothing gets through. But I actually think that's sort of in the movie's favor in a way. And if the movie had been sort of I guess I would say clearer.
Yeah, no, I'm actually 100% with you on this. This movie, Barbie, is entirely confused, and it's to its benefit because you can interpret it whatever way you want, and you can be as mad or as happy about it as you want to be, right?
Yeah, and it also sort of just lets some small things that work really well just sort of like pop off screen. Everybody talking about Ryan Gosling's performance. I also think that about Ryan Gosling's performance. I texted Rachel in the middle of the movie, actually. I said, "Oh my God, this movie is me. You have to see Barbie just because of Ken. I am Ken. Ken is like an attack on me personally. The Kenergy flows through me."
I'm just Ken, and I'm enough, and I'm great at doing stuff.
Yeah, and it's just like, and it's just like, that stuff I think works. I think that's kind of what works about Barbie, even though it doesn't have it actually, a great example of why I like Barbie is the same reason why I like Batman vs Superman. I think these are spiritually similar films in the sense that they are auteur-driven, mainstream, like movie budget with just like incredibly muddled and confused ideas, but there are so many of them that just makes it so interesting and fertile, right? Like that's sort of what I think.
I think I'm with you almost. That I do think some of the problems with Barbie, like what I think it's me detecting, or the way I read it was like corporate meddling. It's like Mattel being like, you can't actually be this hard on Barbie in some ways. We'll get into those specifics once we get into the spoiler section, but I am mostly with you. I thought Oppenheimer was the better movie. I think Barbie might stay with me longer, all things considered. But I think you're right. I think the Barbie movie is incredibly fertile for discussion. I think Oppenheimer is too, but mostly for like the things textually about Oppenheimer. I think there's like not as much to talk about in terms of like story beats. I think there's some stuff, but it's not as big. The bigger, both these movies had huge internet discourse, but the latter one is more about kind of like the real world events that Oppenheimer portrays rather than the actual content of the movie, with a couple of minor exceptions.
I do want to say I think Oppenheimer is the better movie, but I also think that part of that is that Barbie is not a movie for a middle-aged, white guy, right? Like a 33-year-old guy is just like not the target audience for this, and I don't think that I think the people for whom Barbie is really going to connect are just like a entirely perpendicular to me person, right? So it's sort of natural that yes, I would connect more with Oppenheimer.
I don't know if I agree with you just because of Ken, right? Like I think Ken is like I think it might have been like a mistake, and not like in this was like not like a bad decision. I think like it might have been totally unintentional, but I think Ken does like a whole thing in that movie. But I just think
I think so too. But like he's a subplot, right? Yeah. It's kind of like saying, that like I don't know. I can't think of a good example for what I would do with I don't know. It's like saying that like the science in Oppenheimer is what is like what draws you. It's like at the end of the day, the science is pretty secondary to all the other stuff that's going on
That
screen,
I
right?
actually did hear that as a criticism on Twitter. It's like
Really?
they turned a thing that is a feat of science and engineering into a courtroom drama, and that made it bad.
So you know what? We can run down some of these rabbit holes, but let's get to the other side.
Yeah,
of
let's get to spoiler cast. Spoilers for both movies. Spoilers for World War II, I guess, if you don't know what happened there.
Oh my god. The World War II discourse is the thing that actually sends me, by the way. But
yeah,
we'll talk about it.
I mean, this is it's just an excuse to rehash the same argument that everybody's been having since the against. I'm actually fucking seriously saying spoilers for World War II. We dropped 2 bombs. We dropped them in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, right? Whether or not that was a justified decision has been an argument since it happened, right? And this is just another avenue for that to happen. And I don't think the movie's particularly clear either way on it, right? Like I've seen arguments both ways, but like
I don't think the movie. Yeah, this is my. I don't think the movie cares. The movie is making a deeper, more profound point, and everybody who's like focusing on the stupid bombs is like falling into like a first grade ethics trap that I just like makes me want to shoot myself.
Yeah.
Right. Like, you know.
And the movie is about Oppenheimer more than it is about the actual.
Yeah.
Bombs,
exactly. Right. Yes. Because first of all, Oppenheimer had very little to do with the actual usage of the bombs, which the movie is honest about, right? That he doesn't even learn about the bombs like dropping until he listens to the radio broadcast where President Truman announces it or whatever, right? Like that that whole set of decisions. But I have so many other issues with this, and the only reason why is because I weirdly am kind of like an armchair World War II historian, and I just think so many of these conversations are fundamentally and irrevocably flawed, right? Like,
so the scene. So we're past the spoiler mark. I just want to point out that there's a scene where Oppenheimer goes to speak to Truman, and Truman says, "Don't let that crybaby in here again." That actually happened. Like, yep. I think the quote is, "Never bring that fucking cretin in here again." He didn't drop the bomb. I did. That kind of weepiness makes me sick, right? Like.
And you know what's funny? This is the thing that frustrates me, by the way. Truman didn't drop the bomb, and he was mad about it, right? Those decisions were made essentially before he entered office, right? And he had to explicitly make, I think, an executive order or some sort of like military command to say no one is dropping any other nukes without my express permission, because he was so fucking pissed that it all just kind of went along without his like express say so, which obviously everyone knows Truman would have dropped the bombs and it would have been totally fine. But this is the thing that people don't understand about like I guess I just have to do this now. Okay. The stupid meta-ethical thing like this. Is it a trolley problem? Is it, the trolley problem versions we get taught in 3rd grade, right? Oh, we were gonna invade. The invasion was gonna cost 1 million casualties. The Japanese were so whatever. So we dropped the bombs because 50,000 Japanese civilians is better than 750,000 American soldiers or whatever, right? That's like the very basic argument about the atomic bombs. That's dumb. Okay, but whatever. A better argument, but also still dumb, is that Japan was deadlocked and stubborn because there was a set of hardline militarists in the Japanese government and a set of moderates. They were mostly trying to secure a conditional surrender. They wanted to preserve the imperial institution of Japan. They wanted the emperor to still be the emperor. They wanted all of this other sort of stuff, and they just thought that they could hold out for better terms. There was all of this back and forth with the Soviet Union because Japan wasn't at war with the Soviet Union at the time, and they were trying to use that as a means to get the Soviet Union to broker a peace between them and the United States. And at the same time, the Soviet Union was gearing up to enter the war because they wanted to steal back a bunch of land that had been taken from them in like a 1905 war. And it's like, and this is the complex sort of geopolitics answer, right? Which is basically that Japan waited too long and the United States got an itchy trigger finger, and they just fucking dropped the bomb because they needed to force Japan. They wanted to force Japan into an unconditional surrender because that's what President Roosevelt had promised, right? He wasn't accepting a conditional surrender from the Japanese. He was accepting an unconditional surrender. They had to force the issue. They dropped 2 bombs to do that. This answer is also bad, okay, but it is the other answer, right? The real answer is that the dropping of the bombs was a bureaucratic, just labyrinthian set of decisions that was happening no matter what, because all of this money and force and inertia and momentum was going into what was truly a catastrophic total war that all parties thought that they were in, right? The true frame of the atomic bombs is not the 3 months of the geopolitics, right? It's not the 6 months of a hypothetical invasion, right? It is the entirety of World War II, where every major power absolutely and totally militarized their entire economies, because war is an expected part of that society, and all of these groups of people were going to commit atrocities in the furtherance of their pursuit of total victory in this total war, right? And that really all the atomic bombs were is a particularly flashy crescendo to a reign of strategic bombing that left 100,000 dead from firebombs in Tokyo, right? From, the absolute obliteration of German cities like Hamburg and Dresden. Dresden's the one everyone talks about.
Yeah.
Hamburg is actually worse than Dresden, but Dresden's the one everybody talks about. Of the vicious destruction of cities like Nanking, right? Like the rape of Nanking is a thing, right? The only frame for the atomic bombs is that they are one in a long line of atrocities that got made between 1930 whatever and 1945, right? And focusing in on them specifically is a gigantic mistake, because the real answer is 3% of the entire world died during World War II, right? The entire world population died during World War II, and 175,000 Japanese civilian casualties are just a tiny percentage of that overall figure, right?
A million deaths is a statistic, right? Like the Stalin line, right? Like,
and so this is why it bothers me. This is a very left wing. This is where I get to this is like a left wing kind of brain dead take about somebody was a thing that was like, in all 3 hours of Oppenheimer, there's never a Japanese person on screen. It's like, fucking shoot yourself. This movie's not about that, you fucking moron, right? And even if it was,
you know what I saw? I saw Oppenheimer doesn't pass the Bechdel test. I'm should have waited for you to stop drinking.
That's funny. That's funny as fuck. That is funny as fuck. Holy shit. Oh, Christ. That's really funny. Yeah. Yes. Okay. I'm sorry. That's my World War II rant about Oppenheimer and the dropping of the atomic bombs. I will say that I thought that actually the drama that was eked out of that kind of World War II time period was really good and really important, right? Something that also kind of gets sort of muddled and lost is and this is part of what I mean about like the bureaucratic train that was moving, right? Which is that everyone was so fixated on beating the race to the nuclear bombs with the Germans, and it was such an insane reversal that Germany surrendered before the completion of the atomic bombs, that it was like, well, what do we do? Like, what are we gonna go for? Though I will say, to be fair, the bombs were never meant to drop on Japan. In 1943, they decided that the atomic bombs they were going to be building were going to be dropped on Japan, whether or not like Germany was still in the war, because the idea essentially was that it didn't sort of matter. It was such an awesome and insanely powerful weapon that you could drop it on whoever, and the force of that impact would be known. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, there's other stuff in there too. I think I had a point, but I think I lost it.
The anti-Japanese racism is a pretty common one.
Yeah, I mean, and then like there's again, like you said, arguments. Like the argument I have always heard is less about like the raw trolley problem, but like that like the Japanese are basically unwilling to surrender. They fought. The Okinawans committed mass suicide when we took Okinawa to avoid surrendering, and there was a real fear that that was going to be the thing that happened if we invaded the mainland. All that just kind of like stuff, and like I think your view is ultimately correct, right? Like it's what ends up happening, right? Like it's like it something needed to something needed to give and it gave, but there was I can't remember, so I won't push it any further. Yeah. No,
yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, the movie itself is actually not all that interested in this stuff. There are no, there's no cutaways to the war, right? Something I did in preparation for this was I watched just some other World War II biopics. So The Imitation Game is one, and then I also watched Darkest Hour, because those are two pretty recent. They're both Oscar nominated ones, Darkest Hour is Gary Oldman doing Winston Churchill. Imitation Game is Benedict Cumberbatch doing Alan Turing. My understanding is that both of these are kind of like bad in a historical accuracy sense, but good in a
vibes.
Yeah, vibes. Yeah, good in just like it's the spirit of the history rather than anything else, right? The climax of Darkest Hour is this thing where Winston Churchill gets on a train and he just asks the common people. He takes a train to Parliament instead of taking his car, and he just asks the people he's on the train with whether or not that they would surrender to Hitler, because this was when this is 1939, right before Dunkirk. Actually, I guess 1940. Right around Dunkirk, he's going to make that big speech, right, where we'll fight him on the land, or fight him on the beaches, all that other stuff. And it's like a bunch of that stuff is like apocryphal and shit like that. Imitation Game has a bunch of shit that also is sort of apocryphal to kind of create real drama out of what was essentially pretty straightforward, right? Like that there wasn't a lot of friction in that story. People generally did believe in the Enigma machine. There wasn't all of this sort of like doubt from the brass. It's not like the brass came to the barn where the Enigma machine was being made at the time that it was about to spit out its first like breaking of the code. It's actually like, well, yeah, this is kind of more procedural than that. There were questions, but there's nothing direct. There's this whole drama about the whether or not they're going to report on all of the decoded German messages that they're getting, because if things start getting found out, right, like if the Germans start getting thwarted, they're going to realize their Enigma code is being broken. And that stuff never happened. They just kind of they broke the codes and they just handed it off to somebody else, and somebody else made all these other sort of decisions. But anyway, it was and this is probably why I think Oppenheimer had that tactile sense I was talking about before. It is a wildly different biopic than either of those two. And I think if it had been more like those two, right, focused in much more narrowly on the section of Oppenheimer's life where he is running the Manhattan Project, dealing with these different personalities, right? Maybe, you're getting into a little bit of sort of like the political drama around, his whatever communist sympathies and stuff like that, but you probably don't end up addressing that. I actually think it probably would have been a better movie, right? Oppenheimer has a drama problem where once the Trinity test goes off, and the Trinity test sequence is truly magnificent, right? Just like really top tier filmmaking. And I have a thing, I'll put a pin in that, I want to come back to it, but
was this a Josh Peck thing?
Yes. Oh, so weird. The Trinity test would be the climax of a regular movie, and it would make so much more sense, right? Here's a scientist, he's working really hard to do a science problem. These are the problems to his science problem that he needs to overcome, and the super smart guys that he is working with in order to overcome it. They do. The Trinity test goes off at the last minute at 5 a.m. in the morning, right before the Potsdam Peace Conference or whatever. We send off our telegram to, Harry Truman, and the movie ends, right? All of this other stuff with the framing device in the courtroom, and this thing with his security clearance and the political maneuvering between him and Strauss, it's just like that is actually sort of a dramatic lowering of the stakes, right? It's actually much less important and much less important feeling than what does end up happening in actual plot terms. But is in that stuff that you get the meta, sort of the meta commentary and a complete change of the themes, which is that, wow, science is hard, to, the really complex relationship between, this man, speech, right, the political process, his maneuvering with other people in the world, right, the moral weight that he feels for, being the movie has a Prometheus metaphor for being the Prometheus, right, who brings nuclear fire, right, to the world, all this other sort of stuff. All of that comes in the framing device, and I think that's how the framing device sort of earns itself. And Oppenheimer is still a good movie, even if it is worse on a truly plot level, because the last hour is harder to get like invested in, because really at the end of the day it's sort of like his petty personal drama with this guy he doesn't like. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. No, I think I get you. I also think it's what makes it special. Like, to your point, right? Like, it's what makes it a special movie. It's that it's not just about, like, the dropping of the bomb, right? Like, I think, like, the side plot about him and his, like, essentially his love life, I guess, is the easiest way to put it. Like, that whole thing, like, very kind of underserved plot wise. Obviously, at least some striking. Like, I feel like the entire plot line was there to justify the scene where he's sitting at the, the kangaroo courtroom table, and the Gene is like sitting on him naked and looking at his wife, right? Like, that is the entire justification for that plotline, I think, because it's otherwise kind of like, why is it here, right? Like, because it doesn't really like seem to have like all that much relevance to what's happening, other than, I don't know, she was a communist, so it mattered, right? Like, but yes, I generally agree with you. I found like that courtroom stuff like compelling, but I agree with you that the stakes are much less important there. But I think it's also part of the point, right? Like, that is kind of like the explicit, like, at the end is like, with the aides talking to an unconfirmed, a Louis Strauss, just being like, maybe they were talking about something more important than you, right? Like, and that is true, right? Like, that, I think that's like the point, right? Like, is that, like, this immediately devolves and to your point about like the actual bomb dropping, right? Like, this is bureaucracy, and it immediately devolved into politics instead of anybody reckoning with the fact, like, truly reckoning with, like, the force that's been unleashed upon the world, which is an interesting thing to think about.
I actually, the thing that I think carries a lot of this stuff for me is I really appreciated the sort of I guess I want to say, like, the comment on petty reductive thinking, right? The villain in the movie, maybe this is just me. The villain in the movie is sort of like ignorance, right? It is sort of the confirmation bias that egotistical men have, right? And the ease with which things become so easily reduced to kind of like ontological whatever, right? And the thing about the final conversation that he had with Einstein that I thought was so profound is that they were just like kind of having a realer, more substantial conversation than any of these other conversations that we had seen, right? In the courtroom specifically, right? Because the thing about the courtroom that I thought was really there was this part where he's drawing a distinction between being opposed to assigning the resources in an atomic weapons program to the theoretical hydrogen bomb versus the practical sort of atomic fission bombs, right? Obviously, we would all know that a hydrogen bomb is more powerful than fission bombs, and like the correct thing to do is to go for the hydrogen bombs or whatever. But like, the point that the prosecutor, who isn't even a prosecutor, in that room was making was that you didn't support us working on the hydrogen bomb, right? And he's like, no, I supported putting our resources here, not there. It's a very different thing. But I feel like I'm constantly sort of surrounded by these sorts of attempts to reduce things down to this very like core, basic, essentialist level, which is something I really liked, right?
What's the tweet? It's like, people on this app, well, you'll say you like pancakes, and so it says, and so you hate waffles. Like, no, I didn't say that, bitch. That's a whole new sentence, right? Like, it's the same kind of thing, right? Like, yeah, no, I'm like, I think the court framing is part of that, right? It's a bunch of performative nonsense, and the continued reminder, this isn't even a real court proceeding, right? This is a explicitly kangaroo court, and they draw the parallel between that and the Senate confirmation hearing, right? Like, none of it actually matters. It's all like puffery and buffoonery. I think you've nailed it on the head there.
Yeah. I mean, the best part of that is Emily Blunt going back and forth with the prosecutor, just kind of like making a fool out of him, even though it doesn't matter, right? Like, like it doesn't mean anything. But she just sort of effortlessly picks apart the dog shit arguments that he's kind of like making around trying to connect Oppenheimer to, like these communist ties in the middle of like McCarthyism, right? And using that as like a pretense to get rid of his security clearance. But the thing that's profound about the movie is that Oppenheimer actually sort of, in a philosophical sense, wants to get rid of his security clearance, right? There's this question, why don't you fight, that is implicitly answered because he fucking hates himself for creating this weapon, right? That he feels like will doom the world. Which, on one hand, there is a part of me that I have like, I guess I have complex international relationships philosophy about the atomic bombs, right? I think Oppenheimer is right in the beginning of the movie when he says that this is a weapon of peace that will ultimately, bring an end to warfare, which I think is true and borne out by history, right?
Yeah.
But this is not a movie about what is true and borne out by history. This is a movie about what Oppenheimer himself felt like, right? And obviously he felt awful, right, for introducing kind of the atomic age to the world, which, to be fair, right, like obviously Robert Oppenheimer doesn't know that the Soviet is going to crumble, that there never would be nuclear war, right? That the last 80 years have been the most years of consecutive peace, right? That the world has ever seen, and that actually the advent of nuclear weapons has pretty definitively kind of put a stop to the level of warfare that the world was in fact kind of going towards and teetering off a cliff, right? With World Wars 1 and 2, right? Which like I said before, obviously the popular conception of World War 2 is that it is, an ontological good versus evil fight, freedom versus tyranny, democracy versus authoritarianism. All that stuff is actually pretty true or whatever. But the reality is it was a brutal bloodbath from all sides that included quite literal like plans for, like the Nazis had plans to not just commit genocide against, German Jews, but when Operation Barbarossa was supposed to complete and they were going to take control of the Soviet Union, the idea was that they were going to genocide basically all of the Slavic people, and the Russian motherland was going to become the new kind of German fatherland for the Volk, right? Which is like an insane thing to think about in the context of warfare. And this is a routine thought that happens in the context of like World War II, right?
Yeah, I mean,
humans,
the other side of this too is like, like you said, the freedom versus tyranny thing, that's mostly true, but like, America, curious, look up a case called Buck v. Bell. America was pretty big on eugenics for a long time, right? Like, there's an argument that like Hitler's fascism gets its eugenics from American progressivism rather than from inherent fascism, because like Mussolini's fascism, which is arguably like the first fascism, isn't very eugenicist, right? Like there was like a disproportionate number of Jews in Mussolini's fascist movement, which is fucking wild to think about, right? But yes, the history is more complicated than than anybody ever wants it to be, right? But
yeah. I mean, it's funny. This is actually a Johns Hopkins thing, because do you know about the IR program, right? Like, Hopkins has like a really important IR program. One of the professors at Hopkins who I took a class from is the guy who essentially codified this sort of model of looking at the world, and I can't remember even what it's called. But basically, the thing was that humans actually have a pretty innate social barrier for the amount of war they are willing to sort of stomach, right? Which is to say, humans are pretty willing to conquer. They're not super willing to like eradicate in
Right.
most scenarios, right? The level of large scale eradications that we're seeing in World War II and some other times in histories, right, where you would say, like, for instance, like conquistadors, right, or something kind of along those sorts of lines, right? Like those are pretty uncommon given the way that people tend to wage war on one another. And what it comes down to is the capacity for destructions of the weapons that they have, right? And he draws this distinction between, caveman tribes, a stick, right? You're talking about dozens of people. A pointed stick is actually an incredibly deadly weapon. You have no medicine. You have no, your population is whatever. So just coming out of a skirmish with one or two people wounded is like, that could be 5% of your tribe, right? Which is a huge set of. If we said there were 5% casualties in modern war, that would be ungodly. No one could fathom that, right? And then this, as the capacity for violence increases, right, to gunpowder weapons, right, to cannons, is obviously like a big step up. Cavalry is a big step up, right, when people are using horseback to kind of like run down whole, like regiments of men or whatever, right? The idea is that you are never fighting to eradicate your fighting to conquer your opponent, right? To conquer and assimilate. This is why the Roman Empire, this is like the Roman Empire's kind of thing. That's that sort of stuff. And what he talks about is the ultimate version of this is nuclear weapons, right? Nuclear weapons are you can have wars. Iraq War was at the time what he used. You can have wars like the Iraq War, which is a conventional war without nuclear weapons, because ultimately that's about territory and ideology and resources, all this other sort of stuff. But that nuclear war is an incredibly hard thing for someone to stomach or engage in because of how in history, advances like this are sort of seen. Anyway, I don't know, that's like a little IR lesson or whatever. But like I said, what Oppenheimer says earlier in the movie, that he thinks that the nuclear bomb will bring an end to war, he's probably correct in actual IR terms.
Yeah, I mean, and just to like give him a little bit of credit, we did have a couple brushes with, there's like the famous like what like the time that like essentially a cloud, I think it was, like pinged as like a missile being launched, and like some Russian, I think his like name's like we know his name, I don't know why, but like he looked at it and it's like, I'm not willing to end the world over this, and like didn't, but like that was like the closest we probably came to writing, and there were other close calls too, right? So it's not like it's not like he, like Oppenheimer's view was totally, his later view was totally unjustified, but yes. I agree with you. The fact that we were sitting here talking about this movie and this movie got made is testament to the fact that, the world has not been eliminated yet, right? Like, yeah.
It's pretty good. I like the world not being eliminated. I thought the other big standout thing for Oppenheimer were the performances. Basically, everybody did a really insanely good job, including a number of actors who are very good and recognizable being cast in character actor parts. And it is making me think, it's reminding me of Brad Pitt in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, right? Which is a movie I famously loved. I think it was maybe my movie of the year. I really loved Once. Brad Pitt was cast as a character actor in that. He was not sort of the leading man, doing sort of leading man stuff. That was Leonardo DiCaprio, obviously. And this movie is full of performances like that, right? Gary Oldman is Harry Truman. Truly loathsome performance, right? Harry Truman being a complete asshole to Robert Oppenheimer, right? Alden Ehrenreich, right? The Han Solo guy, right? Was the supportive.
The guy who plays Huey in The Boys is one of the scientists too. He's the guy who plays the bongos.
Yep. My favorite character in the movie was Professor Lawrence, Josh Hartnett, who, Hollywood heartthrob from like 20 years ago, coming out of the woodwork to play Lawrence, the right wing sort of friend of Oppenheimer, who is sort of the only friend of Oppenheimer to actually like have his back and refuse to testify in a moment that I was just like, yeah, like, the guy who brought him into the project in the first place. I don't know. I also just love Josh Hartnett. What a great guy.
I love Kenneth Branagh as Niels Bohr. Like, I thought, like,
oh yes,
like I was staring at him and was like, what do I know him from? And then my girlfriend was like, He was the guy with the mustache in Murder on the, or in Murder on the Orient Express. I'm like, oh, so yeah.
Yeah, the guy from the Zack Snyder movie, Army of Thieves, or I'm sorry, Army of Zom. Wait, what is that? What's that movie called?
It's
Army
called,
of the Dead. He's the German safecracker in Army of the Dead. He plays Heisenberg, the German guy. Just one scene, but he kills it, right? There's so many of these. There's so many of these just like, perform. Matt Damon actually is maybe actually also my other favorite, playing Leslie Groves, the general who's in charge of the Manhattan Project. And he is a true, like he's another guy who is like true and has integrity. And just like their sort of bromance in the movie is also very good and very fun to watch. I don't know. There's just like so many of these.
David Dastmalchian playing the character that David Dastmalchian always plays when he's not playing a main
Yeah.
character. It's like this kind of like grimy, like wormy little dude. Where he's like,
Dane DeHaan as I can't remember what his name is, but like one of the kind of conspirators in Oppenheimer, against Oppenheimer, Kenneth Nichols, right? Was also great. Oh, Colin Hanks was another good one. He comes in for that one scene as that security advisor Pash, and you're cutting between what Groves is saying and Oppenheimer talking to Pash, and he just like doesn't blink, and he just like has this incredibly intense glare, and Groves is like, this is a guy who fought, or his dad literally killed communists, right? Like, don't talk to him, right? Like all of that stuff is so good.
yeah, no, I would absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. Well acted. Sound design was great. Like when they dropped the bomb. You haven't seen, if you haven't seen it, you're still watching this. Everybody expecting a boom, and it's just whispers for like a good minute, maybe two, before they like have the boom cut in. I thought that was like fantastic.
Yeah, there was a lot of that. Like cross mixing, right? So, for instance, in the scene in the gymnasium after they do it, and everyone is cheering for Oppenheimer, and he's just like, "Oh fuck, what have I done?" Right? You can hear the stomping of their feet, right? But you can't hear their clapping, right? Which is a really great effect. It's like super clever, right? Because it's so disconcerting to be watching people clapping, but there's no clapping. But it's not like there's no sound, right? Like you understand what it's like when you're seeing something, there's no sound, but there is sound from their feet, and you're watching their feet. And so it's like both of those things happening at the same time, kind of like butting heads against each other, is just, I don't know, really clever filmmaking in my opinion.
There was a moment where like during he's making that speech where it cuts out, and like it goes from cheers to just like a scream, which I thought was like that whole bit where he's like reckoning with what has happened, is I think pretty great. You missed your opportunity to talk about Josh Peck. Do you want to say something about Josh Peck?
Oh yeah, let's talk about Josh Peck. Okay, one of the fucking actors in the film who, to be fair, does a fine job. His name is Josh Peck. Josh Peck is known for the late 2000s television show Drake and Josh, and I guess I didn't even like, by the time Drake and Josh was like out, I wasn't even watching like Nickelodeon anymore. You know what I mean? Like we were in high school. I was like a junior.
It was, I think it was like right on the cusp, because I remember watching like some of the early episodes.
Yeah, well, so the thing with me is that my little sister would watch it, right?
Okay.
So if I was like at my mom's house, my little sister's watching TV, she'd be watching an episode of like Drake and Josh, and it is just like the most hokey sitcom, like Nickelodeon sitcom. This is the era of iCarly, the era of Victorious, all this other sort of stuff. And Christopher Nolan is just the biggest troll in the fucking world, because in the build up to the Trinity test, right? They have enough fissile material bombs, essentially. One of them they are using as what's called the Trinity test, which is, does this mechanism work? Can I detonate a nuclear bomb? Yes or no, right? And it's raining, right? Which is an incredibly rare thing. It's obviously the New Mexico desert. They're doing this. It's raining, and But Oppenheimer is like, but they need to get it in by the next day. And Oppenheimer's like, it's going to break by morning. I know it. Trust me. I know this desert or whatever. There's all of this tension. You know, you see these different places. There's the bunker. There's the place a couple miles away where all of the people are watching. People are wearing, you know, these different, you know, things. There's a guy who just like slathers his face in sunscreen, all this other sort of stuff. And the person that they put on the big console with a huge red button with his hand shaking because, oh my God, I'm about to detonate a nuclear device is Josh Peck of Drake and Josh. It's just like, I don't know how to handle that. It's like if Steve from Blue's Clues just like was included in this movie, like a pivotal scene, right? Like imagine, I don't even know. I can't think of a more tense like movie moment where it would be ruined by some bit actor showing up and just being like, what the fuck? Why is, you know,
Patton Oswalt,
Carlton
maybe?
from the Fresh
Yes,
Prince here?
yeah,
You know what I mean? It's just like, holy fuck.
Yeah, why is Napoleon Dynamite here?
Yeah, yes, yeah, exactly, right. Like one of these guys who's just like, you know, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Josh Peck has been.
You're doing better than Drake, who got accused of sexual assault and like participates in Ethereum drops now.
That's true. Yeah, he is doing better than Drake Bell. I don't know. I guess he did Vine for a while. It's just like, you know what I mean? He is not like Chris Pratt, who ascended to become a true movie star, right? Like there is an alternate version of the world where he never makes that kind of move, and then fucking Andy Dwyer from Parks and Rec shows up, and you're like, what? What is he doing here, right? That was just, I don't know. That's just like the weirdest. That's just like thing.
Yeah, I'm looking at his IMDb, and he's mostly been in. He's in the iCarly reboot. He's in the How I Met Your Father, and he plays Turner in Turner and Hooch. You know, like the Turner and Hooch reboot. So you know,
Wow.
that's the way it goes. So you're right. You know, but yeah,
What is How I Met? Well, you know what? I'm just not gonna worry about it.
yeah. I assume it's his follow up to How I Met Your Mother.
Yeah.
But you know, is that enough about Oppenheimer? Should we move over to Barbie?
Yeah, I guess so. Do I have any? There's some other filmmaking. Great. The bounce between black and white and color, I think, is really good. I sort of had this effect ruined for me because Christopher Nolan explained it in like an interview. But basically, the idea is that everything that is color is subjective to Oppenheimer's experience, which is what allows for these kind of surreal flights of what end up happening, right? Like the thing with the sound I was talking about, or like there are also times where just other surreal, like Florence Pugh fucking him on the chair in the trial thing, basically, right? It's the other thing. It is subjective reality, kind of like in a Darren Aronofsky. It is not objective reality, like in a regular film. I thought that was a really cool interplay. I don't know if I would have picked up on that outside of getting the explanation firsthand, but whatever. I read the tweet, so that's where I'm at.
Yeah, no, I mean it seemed like the black and white stuff focused more on like I would have if you had told me to like pick it out, I would have said like Lewis, you know, black and white is Lewis Strauss and his like petty political concerns, whereas like the color is Oppenheimer and his more like his bigger concerns, right? His more vaunted concerns. But
Do you subscribe to bigger like political sort of readings of the movie, right? I've seen a lot of people make like this is a movie about Trumpism and contemporary American politics. And on one hand, I actually sort of think that there's more to that. I feel like I guess I'm innately skeptical to that claim. I think people say that about fucking everything, and it bothers me. It's dumb. Shut the fuck up. Not everything is about that, right? But also, this is a particularly uh I don't know. It does seem sort of like there is a lot that it's talking about, and I could make a lot of parallels to modern politics. I don't really know how I fall on. I
yeah,
just figured I'd ask.
so the only thing that popped into my head while I was watching it, is there was a lot in here about like cooperating with Russia and a lot about the danger of nuclear war, and so my mind was naturally drawn to kind of like the current conflict between Russia and Ukraine. But I wouldn't say that I thought the movie was saying anything in particular about that conflict.
Yeah, I mean that conflict probably predates, right?
Filming.
I'm sorry, the film predates this
Yeah,
conflict by quite a lot, right?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
there's this thing about like, I don't know. There's something there's like some sort of like point, I guess I want to make about like the superfluous is kind of the wrong word, but just kind of like, I don't know, there's like just like the petty politics.
yeah, the raw partisan hackery almost, right? Like I could buy that, like, you know, like modern politics has an air of like total insincerity. People pick up and discard beliefs as benefits them power wise, and like this movie is that people consumed by that will not think about the larger ramifications. And I could see that, but I also don't think that's particularly explicit or necessary, right? Like I think that's kind of a timeless message. The fact that it maybe has a little bit more applicability nowadays because of our current political climate, I think, is ultimately
yeah. My other thing for this is that Christopher Nolan is fucking British. He's not American. I think this happens all the time. People assume assume everything about, you know, like America or whatever, but I just kind of sit here and it's like, buddy, I think he cares a lot more about, you know, whatever, like, I don't know, Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer. I guess Boris Johnson isn't prime minister anymore, but then he cares about, right, you know, like American politics, but
yeah,
who knows?
True. All right, well, let's move on to the second part of our double feature, Barbie. What do you want to? So the thing I want to talk about here is because this kind of like to link the political to the political. Is this take I mostly saw on Twitter, and I think is kind of like, so this movie we talked about this in the previous segment. The movie's kind of confused, kind of muddled. There are some things that are a mess, right? Like, you know, movie arguably has a very pro-feminist message. However, at the end of the movie, I thought they were going to be like, welcome to the board, Mrs. like protagonist. And it's like, no, turns out the board members were good all along, right? They like, no, this fucking weirdness. Like, what was it? They go to their way to show that like Will Ferrell isn't actually just concerned about money. He's a pretty decent dude. He actually, like, as kind of like backwards as he might be, he actually legitimately seems to care about like girls being inspired by Barbie. This is why he doesn't just sell Ken's Macho Casa, right? He actually roller skates to Barbie World to like save Barbie, right? But then at the end, he's like, no, that's a stupid idea. It won't make money. And then somebody tells him it will make money. He's like, okay, it'll make money. And then they don't like give her, like, I assumed they were gonna be like, hey, welcome to the board, Mrs. Woman. That way you can be on the board. It's like, no. That was me thinking that Mattel was like, don't slander us too hard, right? Like, but the thing I want to talk about, is just like very basic Marxist class consciousness interpretation of the struggle of Ken against the Barbies, right? Like a very plain reading of this is Ken is the oppressed proletariat revolting against the bourgeois Barbies, right? And he succeeds in the revolution, and then the bourgeois proceeds to turn the proletariat against itself in a petty squabble, and then reassert power in like what is effectively election trickery in a way that's like it's not the most solid theory, but like the main character's daughter calls Barbie a fascist. And this is basically like fascist machinations to like, you know, reoppress the oppressed. And you know, obviously the movie doesn't want you to think that, right? The movie tries to do like a heighten the contradictions thing, which kind of like, in my opinion, falls flat, and also is like way too in the weeds for your average viewer to pick up on. But like, I think a very plain Marxist reading of that supports that kind of theory.
Man, I don't even know what to say. That's kind of true.
Yeah, right. Like,
okay, the one thing I would say, I don't think that this is a true Marxist critique, because like Marxist critical theory is more about like the construction of a work like this rather than it is the actual structure, right?
Okay.
The inherent nature of a proletariat revolution, right? I don't think what makes it specifically in the field of what I would call Marxist critical theory, but I do think that it is essentially like Marxism, right, on screen, right? Which is I don't know. It's complicated to deal with.
Yeah, no, I mean, like,
you know,
look,
okay.
if Ken had walked into the library and picked up a copy of Das Kapital, the movie would have still made sense, right? Like,
Yeah,
instead of a book
yeah, exactly. Yeah, what I mean to say is that like Marx's cultural theory is built around like the construction of movies in general and about like cultural hegemony, right? And the idea that an American mega corporation is funding this movie as a I don't know, I guess I would say like darkly metamodernist. Do you know what metamodernism is?
yes.
Yeah, it's like I want to say postmodern, but it is not postmodern because
Yeah.
postmodern is ironic. Metamodern is enthusiastic and sincere, right? Metamodern is sort of like it is. I hate this so
It's
much.
like
It's so stupid.
postmodernism, right?
Yeah,
Like,
it is. Yeah, exactly. It is postmodern. You have modernism, right? Very sincere. We're at the end of history, right? This is the best humanity has ever been, right? Very serious, right? Postmodernism is actually everything sucks. Truth is relative.
very
If you
cynical.
think about it, profession is everywhere, right? Very cynical. Yeah. Irony is very common in postmodernism. And the idea of metamodernism is you're kind of combining that postmodernist kind of critique of the import of things, but also with a kind of earnest sincerity that just sort of celebrates the absurdism of it or whatever. That like who cares? I don't give a fuck that truth is relative. Pretty colors.
Yeah, again, it's the tweet. It's like, it's like millennial nihilists, nothing matters. It's like Gen Z nihilists, and it's like, they're grad skateboarder, nothing matters, right? Like,
yeah. That's kind of it. Yeah. So anyway, like Bobby is like a like a better modern whatever. And I guess one of the other things about metamodernism is that even just sort of the structure of everything gets called into question, which includes the structure of something like an allegory, right? There's this idea in my head that maybe Barbie's not supposed to be allegorical in the way that I think it is. My initial thought for Barbie when I was watching it was I was like, oh, I understand. Barbie is sort of this symbolic interpretation of the sort of like perfect modern realized woman, right? And the woman that she's tied to, this mother, is the kind of realization that no one can be everything. She has this whole big speech where she's like, you have to be this but you can't be that, you have to be this but you can't be that. The contradictory nature of the idea that this version of feminism that people are living in, this like kind of let's call it girl boss feminism.
Yeah.
That these women are dealing with expects too much of them, and maybe it's just okay to like be sad and be nothing and not have to worry about anything. I would say that's probably the point. And at which point we would say this movie is pretty allegorical, right? Because Barbie is supposed to map so cleanly onto, kind of this thing. It also supports the allegory that Ken is maybe supposed to be like a map onto modern kind of like post-feminist masculinity. There's this whole thing in there which I think is real, which talks about sort of like the loneliness that comes in being like a modern, right? Which is a real thing, right? People have studied this, right? And just sort of the idea that men are much less connected to one another and to their partners than they used to be. And part of this is about sort of like the liberation theory behind feminism, where if women are no longer defined by their roles as wives and mothers, they're no longer defined by the partnership with a man, right? That relationship erodes in order to give women sort of the freedom to explore all of these other sort of things that culture does. That's good, that's feminist, that's equality, but it also sort of leaves men who otherwise used to attach themselves to women as their core emotional relationship in the dust, right? I kind of feel like that's what we're going for with Ken. But like, it doesn't actually have anything real to say or offer or comment on besides just this exists and is kind of magically solved without any doesn't actually like purely on the movie's terms, right? It pits Asian Ken and blonde Ken, right, against one another, and they go through a whole dance number and then they're friends. and it doesn't explain why. It doesn't offer anything. There's no reason for that to have happened. It's just sort of narrative sleight of hand, right? And this is the weakness, and this is the thing that I think is bad about like Ken in the movie, right? Where it's not actually saying anything outside of just sort of highlighting the gender issue for men as typified by Ken in this movie.
Yeah, I think similarly, right? Like, I think part of the issue is like the movie, like the women brainwashed in the Kendom are happy as far as we can see, and the movie just leaves it to us to assume, right, that like you're to take on face that it's bad, and I'm mostly fine with that, but like it doesn't, it's kind of like lets it go, right? Like if I wanted to like make like a true kind of like angry like there's a version of this where it's like, and the beta Allen undermines the alpha Ken, right? Because in an attempt to gain status for himself by re-enabling the what's the word that they like the there's a word that gets used for like the kind of like female the female centric kind of argument here. We talked about this before, and maybe we call it the longhouse, right? Like, which is a term that neither of us understands very well, but like like
yeah, I mean, I think so. For instance, Ben Shapiro is really angry about this movie, and I imagine a lot of conservatives are going to be, just because I think I'm weirdly sympathetic to if I was a conservative, which obviously I'm not. But I would actually kind of be sympathetic to them being angry at this movie, not out of a I don't know. I don't want to speak for Ben Shapiro, and I'm sure he's making a worse argument than I'm about to make. So maybe I do think he's probably being dumb. But I do think that there is a thing in the movie which sort of equates this idea of kind of like traditional femininity with like the brainwashing, right? Yeah. Which is I think kind of the point of feminism is not to say that being a housewife is bad. The point of feminism is to say that you can be more than just a housewife, right? And so there's this idea that like it's bad when the women kind of get infected with the patriarchy and brainwashed by chem or whatever else on its face, right? To the exclusion of that kind of, I don't know, that kind of expression of their femininity. But probably a more accurate version would have included some of the women saying, you know what, I actually really like my Ken, and I like that stupid song that he sings to me on the guitar, and I'm happy in that version of reality. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, and there's also like, I don't know. I mean, I think there's people that are going to be angry because the movie is kind of like, I don't think it argues them particularly well, but it has like a very open politics. The one that kind of like chafed me, and this is just because of a clear misunderstanding of what was at stake in Citizens United, but the opening scene where the Barbie Supreme Court, like it's just like that irked me just because it was like openly contemporarily political in a way that I thought just like fundamentally misunderstood the issue that they were getting at. But like, that's just the thing that chafes me because it chafes me, right? Like,
yep.
And I could see a lot of, but I think also to a point that we got to earlier, like it's not necessarily for middle-aged white guys, right? Like,
yeah, this is part of my thing with the Ken stuff. Sure, the movie doesn't have answers, and it plays this game of narrative sleight of hand, right? Ken and the other Ken have a dance number. They're friends now. No, it's not really explained, and the explanation to that question is what matters, right? What is the solution, in other words, to the problem of male loneliness in gender terms? But really what that's an argument for is a Ken movie, right?
Yeah.
This is ultimately a subplot in the Barbie movie to set up an antagonistic force that the Barbies need to kind of do a feminism essentially to overcome, which that's fair enough, right? Like the whole bit about them sort of like deprogramming the guys or whatever and all this stuff, I thought all that stuff was legitimately funny and like good, right? Like I'm on board with all of that piece of the puzzle. So really the thing that I'm angry about is that the movie is not more targeted to an issue that I think it doesn't answer very well, when the real answer is, in the same way I said this about Batman vs Superman, sometimes just raising the question is interestingly enough. We don't have to have answers for everything, right?
Yeah.
So I do want to make that part clear.
Yeah, no, I think I'm with you on most of that. Yeah, no, I also think that I think part of the problem with the movie is that I don't think it really answers a lot of questions very well.
Yeah.
Like I don't like I don't think it particularly answers like the Barbie side of the question super well either. Right? It's like kind of ends on like a Pinocchio Aesop, but like kind of right. Like, what was the other thing I was gonna say?
Yeah,
Go on.
I think it ends on a joke to do the same thing, to
Right? Yeah,
sidestep
yeah,
putting a real answer to, okay, we have followed Barbie as the main character. She's gone through all this existential drama and angst. What is our conclusion here? There's some vague stuff about sort of freedom in the sense, which is true. She is free. She's in the human world and has truly become a right. Um, but the movie ends on the joke, I think, because it doesn't have a real poignant end. There's nothing profound there. It just kind of is funny and you laugh and you don't think about how it actually is kind of an unsatisfying answer.
yeah. No, I agree with that. I agree with that 100%. Um, yeah, I've heard this movie described as Fight Club for women, and that kind of resonates with me on a basic level. Like,
But there's Fight Club for. I mean, my thing about Fight Club is a poster child for sort of how not sarcastic, not sardonic. What's it called? Satire, for like the satire paradox, right? Where people empathize with what is being satirical, right? Tyler Durden is explicitly the bad guy in Fight Club, but people think he's cool and Chad and Alpha and all this other sort of like dumbass shit. And is Barbie satirical on that level? I don't think, because it's not satire. It is a embrace and celebration of. It's not a satire,
sure,
right?
yeah, no, I see that, but like, I also don't think the text of Fight Club is as straightforward as you put it out, right? Like at the end of the day, they do blow up the buildings, right? Like, you know, I think there's something about like wrestling with what it means to be, your particular person, right? Like wrestling with what your nature is, like what your instincts tell you to do versus versus what society tells you to do, that kind of thing. I think that's the kind of spirit it's meant in.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I guess I have complicated feelings about Fight Club. Part of this is that I like Chuck Palahniuk, and I've read books, and I have read Fight Club itself. And the Fight Club book ends in a different way than Fight Club movie. In the Fight Club movie, it just ends with those credit card, company buildings coming down in this sort of like a blatant act of terrorism. But in the book, the ending of the book is that he shoots out part of his brainstem. He shoots out the brainstem that is Tyler Durden, and he's like paralyzed or whatever. But he's in the hospital, and he's finally free of Tyler Durden's influence. But when he's in the hospital, a male nurse comes up to him, and because he's like paralyzed, can't do anything else. The male nurse talks about how, like, don't worry, sir, Tyler Durden's gonna like live on in the rest of us. Kind of like a tragic ending, right? He thinks he has solved this problem for himself, but all he's really done is paralyzed himself, and Tyler Durden has spread like a mind virus to other sorts of people, right? I don't think that obviously doesn't come across as strongly in the movie version. But I don't know. I guess I think that in the movie, I don't know. I want to say that ending is kind of comedic and tragic at the same time, right? That all of the fighting he does to stop Tyler from doing this thing fails. But maybe you're right. I don't know.
Yeah.
And maybe yeah. I think really at the end of the day, the satire paradox is a real thing and it's tough, and maybe that's just the reality for
I mean,
Fight Club and Barbie at the same time.
I would say if you want to talk about the satire paradox, right? Like there's like this is a thing actually. Somebody I listened to, I think it's I forget who exactly it is, talks about how like there is this thing where in the course of a show or a movie, a villain essentially becomes the thing that people latch onto, and some of that is just kind of like contrarianism, but some of that's also kind of like the people who are portraying them are stunning, are like charming, and like they're not totally out of their minds, right? Like the big example that I always hear about this is Jack Donaghy in
30 Rock.
30 Rock. Thank you. Where he starts out the other the parallels also Ron Swanson, right? He starts out as like this conservative kind of d bag, but like he's Alec Baldwin and Nick whatever his name is,
Offerman.
Yeah, Nick Offerman are such charming people that like they kind of like turn the audience to their side. But also like the other aspect of this is that like in a lot of these shows, right, like the I guess the kind of like emancipated liberal woman tends to be the main character, so it tends to have a lot of conflict. Also tends to be sad and like a failure at their love life. Whereas like this putative antagonist, right, like antagonist, like father, like character has his life together and is nice and charming, so people end up sympathizing with them, even though it kind of cuts against the politics of like everybody who's writing the show, and so they're kind of like forced into this situation where like this guy who's supposed to be like a representation of a lot of the things they hate ends up being a thing that a lot of people love, right?
Yeah, no, I think the prototypical example of this white, right? Like the people who think Walter did nothing wrong or whatever,
Right.
another it is so. Oh, Ryan, can you please stop? It is so antithetical to what that show is supposed to be about, right? Walt is the protagonist, but he is not a good person.
Right.
And it is the conflation of those two things, because I think I would make the argument, you might not go to this level with me. I would make the argument that it is men who are submerged in sort of a toxic masculinity ideal of themselves obviously connect to Walter White because he is sort of typified toxic masculinity. So if you are the kind of person who thinks masculinity is good actually, and the way that I don't know, modern values attack that sort of thing, you probably look at Walter White and think that he is like he is the coolest or whatever, right? Because he is a nerd who became the most powerful man in crime. But when I look at that, I see a guy who is completely undone by his pride and his ego, because those are also pieces of like the kind of toxically masculine archetype that eventually lead to his downfall. And when we talked about Breaking Bad, I went into this thing how like Mike is the foil because he is the truly masculine man that Walter thinks he is, right? Who is legitimately doing it for the altruistic betterment of his family, and he doesn't have the ego that Walt does, and that's why Walt kills Mike. It's just because of ego, and he can't see a man do what he wants to be doing better than him, basically, right? This is my like Breaking Bad thing. I think people misunderstand that because it is, there are a wide view of ideologies in the world, and some people are going to look at, for instance, Ken's embrace of the patriarchy in the Barbie movie, and they are going to say that's cool, right? I'm happy for Ken, right? Like,
Yeah, no, I think most of that's fair. I also think there's like a level of, I think whenever you talk about this kind of thing, there's a level of like, but it would have been different if I was there. Like I'm built different type of thing, which I found out came from like, what's a Mark Wahlberg quote where he claimed that if he had been on like one of the planes during 9/11, it wouldn't have gone down like that or whatever. It's like,
yep.
That kind of like.
I think he said he was supposed to be on one of the planes that didn't go. There's a lot of those stories.
Yeah.
Seth MacFarlane. 9/11 planes, and he overslept and missed his flight.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things where like you poll enough people, and like it's like 80% of men think they could fight a bear or something. It's not that high, but like you get these charts about like animal that average man thinks you could take, and it's like surprisingly high for like animals that they clearly don't stand a chance against, type of deal, right? Like
yeah,
that kind of thing.
Yeah, this is all sort of part. Something I have been just obsessed with, and I've talked about this. I don't know if I've talked about this on the podcast. I have been obsessed with watching YouTube videos about like the red pill movement getting essentially just owned and made fools of and made fun of, because they're just like the biggest fucking dweebs on the internet.
Sure.
It's fun to bully them, basically, or whatever. But this is the kind of like animates these kinds of guys, right? You know, and they say that, oh god, they're just so cringe. They just say like the dumbest shit, and it's like these are the kinds of people who are going to watch the Barbie movie. They're going to see Ken and be like, oh yeah, Ken is like, you know. I don't even know. I don't even know what they would fucking say. The Sigma Ken is on his Sigma male grind set or something.
Yeah.
Right?
Ken is on the Sigma grind set until he gets cucked. Essentially, right? Like, um,
Yep. Yeah.
yeah. I think there's like a thing there about just kind of like general levels of confidence, right? Like, you know, the same type of person that thinks they can fight a bear also probably is successful because they strive beyond their means, and like sometimes, and, you know, sometimes that works out because, you know, I'm sure you know this, in life there's a lot of people who like vastly overestimate their competence, but like you're at the same kind of like level as them, and like you're and like well, I might actually be better than the median because who knows how many people like that are out there versus me, right? Or like sometimes the job just requires confidence, right? Like sometimes you just like things might actually be easier than you think you are. It's just a matter of taking the step, and I think that's like what a lot of this kind of stuff like speaks to. It just kind of like obviously doesn't always get directed in the healthiest direction, right? Like this is why, like, say, a lot of people, especially when he was more about just kind of like, so like, you know, around was it 12 things for life, the early Jordan Peterson stuff, right? Like, you know, talks to young men, gives them a sense of purpose, gives them a way to order their lives. And I don't doubt that there are many people who are like legitimately helped by that kind of thing, right? Like the stuff that goes off the deep end is you know, more harmful, less helpful. But like the part where like, you know, take charge of yourself and like apply yourself is like, you know, kind of basic good advice that, you know, sometimes you just need like an angry man that sounds like Kermit to tell you to do it in order for it to work, right? Like
Jordan Peterson counts like Kermit the Frog. How have I never noticed that before? Holy fuck.
really, you've never heard that joke before?
Oh my god. I don't fucking watch Jordan Peterson
You
videos.
don't see
Like, you know
clips?
what
I mean, I don't either, but like, you know,
Yeah, that's true. He does. He does sound like Kermit the Frog. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just think that um it's funny because I think a lot of this stuff is sort of unrealistic in a certain sort of sense, right? Like one of the things that people will talk about with their it's like, oh well, the you know, there needs to be a leader in the relationship, and I need to, like, Andrew Tate will say shit like this, right? He'll say like, I if I'm responsible for a woman's safety and men are protectors, so protectors are going to be responsible for women's safety, I need to have, you know, authority over, you know, over her, whatever. You know, if I'm going to be the one making the decision on what, you know, like fucking alleyway we walk down that might have several assassins, it's like, this is ridiculous. No one lives in a world where, right, like, you have to violently confront, like, nobody needs to carry a fucking, like, you know, it is true levels of I studied the blade cringe.
sure.
Which is what I find so satisfying about watching people own these guys. But yeah, I imagine that this like group of people are gonna find a lot to sort of empathize with in Ken. Especially because I actually think the movie does make a mistake by sort of divorcing Barbie and Ken at the end of the movie, right? Like I said, I think it's making a point about sort of like this, you know, like this nature of in traditional sort of gender roles, men derive their emotional from women, right? Because men are typically not emotionally available to other men. But so breaking that for Barbie is that she doesn't need Ken. She's not in love with Ken. But I was actually kind of hoping for another sort of version of, which I would say would be kind of the Waymond message from Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is that, you know, there is you know, this is a version of masculinity, what it means to be kind of like a partner to like the woman in your life. And I feel like early Ken in that movie is the prototype of, right, who cares a lot about Barbie and who supports her, right, and you know, all this other stuff. And obviously it's funny, there's bits and jokes or whatever, but I don't know, I was hoping they would get together. That was my
Yeah. No, and I think you're a little too optimistic. I think the reason that Barbie doesn't end up with Ken is because that's the way that a movie ends. and you can't like, and like, explicitly like that can't be the ending because that's the way a stereotypical movie ends, and that's like not the right message for the film, which I don't think is like a problem, but I think that's I think that's the pretty explicit reason why you know Barbie doesn't end up with Ken.
I don't have that cynical a take, but you know what?
I will tell you that the daughter literally says that can't be the ending for Barbie, right? Will Ferrell says Barbie loves Ken, and the daughter says that can't be the ending for Barbie, right? Like, I think that's a pretty, pretty explicit intention there. Like,
yeah, you know, maybe you're right. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. This is part of my thing about like, I kind of don't like the way that it attacks kind of like traditional feminine values.
yeah.
Maybe that is more evidence of this. I don't know. I don't know how. I want to give the film like more credit than that, right? Like I think that Noah Baumbach, I think that Greta Gerwig are really smart, obviously, and they understand the nuances of this stuff, but maybe they don't.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, maybe the movie's just a little bit confused because like there's like a moment where the daughter calls Barbie a nut job, and then like catches herself and says, "Oh no, like some euphemism, like a altered mental, you know, like this some like new euphemism, which is a joke, right? Like it's clearly played. It's like, you know, but like that's a weird thing to be in this movie, right? Like, you know, that is, you know, otherwise just kind of like pretty pro modern feminism, right? Like, so excuse me, I'm sorry, I don't know exactly what their kind of overall intention is. Or maybe that's the point, right? Like, you know, there's no right answer, that kind of thing.
Yeah, maybe the point, and this is sort of the thing of that is weirdly like frustrating, right? Which is that it's not an allegory. It'll never match up. You can't build out sort of the, you know, like the web of interactions that make it make sense. And that's fine, I guess. I don't know. Part of me just wants to sort of like call it quits. You know,
Yeah.
you can't make it make sense. Part of this is just gonna always be weird. It is a bunch of round pegs trying to get into a bunch of square holes, but some of them get through, and that's fine. And I should sort of like take it. You know?
Yeah. No, I mean, in terms of visual language, this film was pretty great, right? The opening is like a 1-to-1 parody of
2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah. The kind of moment where like Ken gets red pilled, right? Like where he like sees like, you know, men everywhere and the dollar bills flying by. Like that's like, I feel like that was like a reference that I was supposed to get that I just didn't like recognize, right? Like I thought that was super pretty. The pastel, like the sets are great. The I'm Just Ken musical number, right? Like I'll see you on the beach in Malibu, or I'll see you on Malibu Beach or whatever. That was fantastic. I love that part of the movie. I want that somebody to like upload that scene to YouTube so I can watch it on loop for like half an hour, right? Like
yeah, yep, I agree.
And you know, it's like it's I think its spectacle is worth the price of admission. Even if like, you know, I think it's muddled and confused. Other fun little things like, you know, I was like the Kate McKinnon's like weird Barbie, right? Like I thought that was a neat idea. You know, again, for our more technical minded viewers out there, don't try and understand the like mechanics of the Barbie universe because none of them make sense at all. But I don't care, right? Like the movie seems to imply there is a Barbie for every Barbie doll in the world, but sometimes it's that the Barbie is the agglomeration of all of that type of Barbie, right? Like, but you know that's ultimately not important. But it's a fun movie, and like with lots of, so something that I thought was super interesting was Ellen and Midge are real Barbie dolls, right? Like they are real things that happened, and maybe a week before the movie came out, I forget. I think his name's like Kudos or something, Many Kudos or something like that. He's an internet guy. He has a video series called Many Scandals, and he did a Many Scandals video on Barbies. Mostly they're about like nerd stuff, right? Like about like Magic the Gathering, whatever. But he explains that like that Midge was one of her things when she was pregnant, right? And this caused a controversy because she was sold by herself, and a bunch of mothers in the Midwest were like, "This is encouraging like getting pregnant out of wedlock, right? This is immoral." And this is what caused Alan to be spawned, right? Because he was the husband for Midge, so that like it was acceptable for her to be pregnant, but like, and the joke, his tagline was like he fits in all of Ken's clothes, which like quickly became like, you know, a gay joke, right? The earring Ken was like a real thing that like apparently one of the most sought after Ken dolls, because like the gay movement at the time, because it was much much less prominent then, right? Like it was still like people in it was open in San Francisco, closeted everywhere else, that kind of thing. He was like wearing effectively a cock ring around his neck, and like the people at Mattel just didn't know, and so that doll just sold out everywhere, and it's like impossible to get now. So like that's all real stuff. I'll try and remember to put that video in the description, because there's a lot of interesting stuff there that like actually kind of increased my appreciation for the movie in a weird way.
Okay, fair enough. The one thing I do want to talk about is the box office numbers behind Barbie and Oppenheimer, which I do think are really like, this is something else. There's a guy who said that Hollywood doesn't learn from flops, it learns from hits, right? Which is to say that movies will flop and Hollywood will never learn a lesson, right? The Flash just lost $200 million or whatever for Warner Brothers. And the idea is that Warner Brothers isn't going to pivot. It's not going to change its strategy or anything because of that. Flops are just kind of like part of the calculus of movie making. But hits change things, right? When people see a big unexpected hit and it comes out of nowhere, it changes their thinking in really dramatic ways. A good example of this would be something like Deadpool comes out R-rated, an R-rated superhero movie or whatever, and that is the kind of thing that would go on to fuel other sort of takes on like this R-rated superhero genre, right? Zack Snyder's Justice League is R-rated. Batman vs Superman Ultimate Edition is R-rated. You'll have R-rated like Punisher movies. You'll have R-rated Logan, right? It's like, oh, people will understand that. Okay, yeah, you can put this thing behind an R and like make this, because this movie big unexpected hit comes out of nowhere kind of thing. Barbie and Oppenheimer, I think, probably do that. And the thing I would probably expect is like just creative license. I imagine that the order of the day would be go find, talented, unique filmmakers and kind of let them make their passion project. And let's see if we can, sort of fuel in a way, like this kind of thing. And maybe the answer will be yeah. Maybe the answer will be no. Who knows?
Yeah, like go find Taika Waititi and make him like give him make us a weird movie about G.I. Joe, or something like that. Like I heard there's like 11 other Mattel movies in the works, which is terrifying. But
what are the Mattel movies in the works? Let's take a look. Okay, so Masters of the Universe, I think that just got canceled. Hot Wheels from J.J. Abrams. Who knew? Look at that. Barney, that's weird. Polly Pocket. Okay. Do you know Major Matt Mason? Who the fuck is that?
No.
Rock'em Sock'em Robots, Uno, Magic 8 Ball, American Girl, Viewmaster, Chatty Cathy, Thomas the Tank Engine, and Matchbox. I don't know. I don't know how you make any of these successes.
Yeah. I mean, the answer might be find an auteur who played with these toys as a kid and has a weird idea for them and let them go wild, right? Like, but who knows? Like, your point, this movie was a success. Mattel will make all 11 of these sequel movie, or of these other movies, and they will all flop, and they won't learn a thing. Maybe, right? Like, who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's, I guess, our main segment. How are your almost 3 weeks, buddy?
Oh my God, you're right. It has been almost 3 weeks. I've been doing a lot of stuff. The big news, playing Hearthstone Battleground. As like a chess game. I had to do it for a Hearthstone event, right? Like an in-game event. And it's so fun. It's so fun and addicting. And I don't know what's fucking wrong. I'm like super into it now.
Yeah.
I have no idea what else to say about it besides just I don't know, because we did auto chess, right? Do you remember doing auto chess when you did, or TFT technically?
Yeah, I did TFT. I never played like the original auto chess, but I played a lot of TFT.
Yeah, Battlegrounds is the Hearthstone version of auto chess or TFT. But it's a very different game, and I would say it's better. I like it better than I like TFT, right? TFT has a lot to do with kind of like the items that you buy and kind of equip. Battlegrounds is it's like you have 7 slots on your board and you can only get that many slots, but it's about scaling, right? And you can have stuff like characters from the very early game who scale into the mid and like late game, right? Like there's a character called God, yeah, man, what's the thing called? God, it has the dumbest name. Whatever, it's like a demon thing, and it's like every time you play a demon, this gets +2/+1 or something, right? And it's like, oh, well, you buy this on your first turn, and you just go demons, and you just pop 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 demon, and it just gets so big that this is the thing that you take from turn 1 to turn 20, right? It goes all the way in, but it's just like there, because that level of scaling exists, and there's also no economy in the sense of if you remember in TFT, there's that thing where you save up to 50 gold, and then you're earning interest every round. In Hearthstone, you just get 10 gold a round, but like you can buy stuff that affects your gold, right? So you can buy a minion that'll say get 1 gold at the end of the turn, right? Or battle cry, get 1 gold next turn, that kind of thing. It's just like all of that stuff. I think is pretty interesting and like pretty complex, and I have just been having a fucking ball. It might be. I think the real thing that it comes down to be honest, is that there's heroes and there's like 50 of them, right? Your lobby is full of 8 different heroes. They all have hero powers and different, kind of like builds and stuff like that or whatever. And then there's also a huge collection of creature types, only 5 of which of 10. There are 10. It's like Nagas, Quillboar, beasts, Murlocs, demons, all this other sort of stuff. But there's only 5 available at any time, right? And the interaction between heroes, available tribes, and like the different permutations on all of that is so complex. I don't think anybody can math it out, right? And nobody could do this thing where it's like, oh, I understand this. It's like, oh, well, if there's Naga and undead but no beasts, then I can go. And it's like no one could do that because the options, the permutations are so fucking insane, right? You never be able to actually like get it all out, which truly makes every round feel unique, but also legible, right? It's not like it's completely random. You have a strategy that you're building towards, and it's comprehensible. But because the parameters of every randomized to such a degree where you're never gonna have the same heroes in the game, you're never gonna have the same tribes in the game. It's just like it's like infinite content. I just can't run out of it because every game is a unique set of circumstances that I have to puzzle out. And does that make sense?
It does. It does. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. So I don't know. I've been having a great fucking time playing TFT. I've also been playing Diablo. The Diablo playing Minecraft, because the Minecraft server that I've been working on, just been having fun with that. There's a lot of new stuff in Minecraft. But like I don't know, this is all just kind of like shit. The real thing is that I'm just very off WoW. And to be honest, I'll probably be off guess a while longer. I don't know. It's mostly about my Mythic Plus, where one of our friends is so he just doesn't have access to his computer. He hasn't had a computer set up, so we haven't even done the new Mega Dungeon yet. And I want to save that experience to friends, obviously. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at.
Very cool. Yeah. On my end, I played a little bit of the Diablo season. Felt mostly like more of the same, honestly. So I'm not like super like I'm playing a Necromancer just to see what it's like, but it was like not super compelling enough to me for me to be like, okay, I'm like into this. I'm interested that they're basically doing the PoE thing, where like each new season brings with it like new mechanics type of deal, which could be interesting long term. What else? I picked a Pizza Tower, just because like that was a meme game and it looked interesting. Like I'm into platformers and it's fun. I don't know if it's got a lot of staying power with me, but like it gave me like there was one of the achievements is beat like the first level in under 2 minutes, and I got that finally got that like I kind of got speed running because like a much smaller scale, but I find that like most time trials in like games are pretty loose. The one in this game is pretty tight. It's not like impossible, but like I definitely had to try a bunch of times. Definitely had to develop strategies around it. When I actually beat it, I ended up beating the record by like or the benchmark by like 10 seconds. So I was like, oh, like I get it now. So that was neat. Very crisp controlling. I like it a lot. I hit gold in Street Fighter on my boy Zangief, which is great. Rashid came out today, but I haven't played him yet. What else did I play? I jumped into CK3 for a little while. Just because I felt the desire to play around with that. It was fun enough. I played as like one of the Sammy, and I formed the Sammy Kingdom. And I was like, you know what? I'm good for a little while. There's a new pack coming out on the 22nd, so I'll probably dip my toes back in on that. Otherwise, I've been dipping my toes back into WoW just because it's fun to kind of like clean up content if there's been a bunch that's like accumulated, and I do kind of want to hit my traveler's log for the month. I like the amount at the end of it, so I might do that.
I have to hit that. That's true.
Yeah, I was saying like it's the first month where I've had any trouble hitting it. So like I've been doing things like the miscellaneous, like go cheer at the dragon aspects and get 50 travelers points, right? So definitely not hard to do, but a thing that's like, whereas normally I'll just get it by like raiding with the group, and then the guild's been kind of like lax, so it's not even like we're raiding super regularly, so I don't even know if we'll hit that limit. So I'm not too chuffed about it, but it's
yeah, no, I haven't done the idea behind the trade centers. Anyone who's playing the game pace will clear it out by the month, but yeah, I have only been raid logging and skipped a couple of raids. Like we skipped a couple of raids just for like attendance stuff. I skipped I think I raided last Thursday, but I don't even know that we got enough people for like last Thursday. It's just like, yeah, stuff like that.
Last Thursday we did not have enough people because I wanted to raid and there weren't people there to raid. I know this. But I played Street Fighter instead, so all is good in the world. Yeah. Did I do anything else of particular note?
Did you ever play Mordor Shadow of War?
Yes.
Wait, did we talk about this?
I think we might have. I don't know if we talked about it for an episode, but I like beat most of it until you hit like Act 3, which is like grind everything to infinity. I just never did that.
Did you like conquer all the fortresses or whatever?
I don't remember, honestly. It was so long ago.
Okay, I feel like I have 25 hours in that game, and I feel like I have just opened it up, which is insane to me. Because it has a very slow ramp tutorial getting you into like at first you're just doing you're assassinating chiefs, okay. Then Ethel becomes Minas Morgul, right? To be fair, I thought it was very fucking cool. And you get your ring back from Shelob, and now you can dominate like the other war chiefs. And I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. I can like carry these guys around. Then you conquer the fortress in like the Sea of Nirn or whatever, and I was just like, oh, okay, wow, all right. And so it was incredible to me that this game had a 25-hour sort of Act 1 basic introduction to its core mechanics. That was wild to me.
Yeah, no, I mean, I kind of remember that just because like I remember taking a while to really get into it. Also, I think when I was playing, like they had like a kind of like battle pass pay to winny thing when it initially launched that people were mad about. I know they eventually pulled that out, so you might be getting a better experience than I did. Was I beat
maybe
it like around release? I think. I want to see how
I
many
mean,
hours
yeah,
I have in it.
there is an online component that I just don't participate, right? Which is that like, you can create a warband of orcs who like hold your fortress and other people can attack your fortress, sort of like Clash of Clans or whatever. And it's just I'm obviously not gonna deal with that. This is a game from 6 years ago, right? I don't even know who the fuck is playing at this point, right? Um I'm mostly just kind of in it for like honestly the mechanics are good, and I just haven't played like a open world kind of stealth action game. It's honestly surprising to me how good it is, and there's not like a sequel or anything else being kind of like done. Obviously, Monolith Studios, I think, are just like other stuff. They're owned by Warner.
Yeah, it's a
They're
Warner
doing
Brothers
that
thing.
Suicide Squad game, but yeah.
Yeah, they I mean, it's kind of criminal. Like I think like Shadow, like the Nemesis system is like one of the coolest things in the world, and it's just like
It
never.
is so it is truly so fucking cool, and like I can't even I don't know. I can't even say anything more about it. It's just like so fun.
Yeah. I wonder what is Monolith production? The Monolith did a bunch of Batman stuff, I guess. Also, they worked on. Oh no, it just brought me to a WB Games store. Never mind. Sorry, I clicked on Monolith on the developer on Steam. And it brings me to the WB Games page, which has like Mortal Kombat or not.
Oh, okay.
Uh, yeah, Suicide Squad is Rocksteady. Does Monolith even exist anymore?
Let's look. Monolith Studio.
It looks like it exists. Got a website at least.
Oh, they have a Wonder Woman game?
They worked on Gotham City Imposters, which is a game that I thought was fun, but no one played.
Oh my god, they did No One Lives Forever. These games are like famous.
They did
Oh,
Matrix
wow.
Online.
I didn't know they worked on all of this stuff. I guess I did know some of because I knew that they were behind Fear, which is another game that everybody like really fucking loves. What is Guardians of Middle Earth? Oh my god, no way. It's a Lord of the Rings MOBA?
Sounds about right.
That is ridiculous, but okay. Yeah, I mean, Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of obviously the big ones, but I do remember No One Lives Forever, classic game. Like it's like a game developer, sort of like the way that like what would I like I don't know, it's like a movie person's movie.
By the way.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
Yeah. I
yeah.
don't know. That about it then?
I guess that's about it.
Um, well, if you'd like to write to us about any of the things we talked about on this podcast, you can reach us at nerdsplaygames@gmail.com or podcast@nerdsplaygames.com. You can follow us at twitch.tv/nerdsplaygames or youtube.com/nerdsplaygames where these go out live. Um, rate and review us on iTunes or wherever you can, wherever you find podcasts. We'll be there. Links are all in the description, but that's everything I have. Do you have anything you're looking to promote? Bleh.
I don't think I've well, actually I have one thing I'm looking at last week, called Airframe Ultra. Have you seen or heard of Airframe?
I have. I saw that when you retweeted like the teaser, and I saw the trailer because I'm subscribed to your YouTube channel.
Yeah, Airframe Ultra is of Rain World, but it's a very cool kind of combat racing game that they've been working on that I've play tested. It's super fun. I'm actually gonna I want to show it off on stream. It's super bare bones, obviously, and we've talked about how like what we do this deep in development, but I really want to show it off on stream. I want to play Airframe Ultra with people. So if if you want to take a look at Airframe Ultra, give that bad boy a wish list. Go nuts.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's cool. With that, I'm gonna say until next time, your listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.